Yeah, it's actually what I was going to say is it's how important it is to have the freedom, liberty, and courage to have a conference in Kiev, regardless of what the neighbors are doing. Let me say that not many of us would have expected a few years ago, or even I'd say a year ago, that the short-lived mountaineer republic in the North Caucasus could again become an inspiration, potential inspiration, as the rupture of the Russian imperial state accelerates. Remember, this I think will be the third, or some would say even the fourth Russia fracture since the collapse of the Tsarist Empire during World War I. And although previous ruptures involved partial restorations, paradoxically with this rupture, I think the attempted and failed restoration of a larger empire by conquering and subordinating Ukraine will now contribute to unraveling the inner empire. And I believe the North Caucasus will be one of the major drivers and beneficiaries of this process. And it is time now to prepare for the future. I listened to Paul a few minutes ago, excellent. I would agree with every single word that he said. Let me try and add a few thoughts as well. I would say that on the anniversary of the Mountain Republic, a concrete agenda needs to be discussed among representatives and activists of all nations of the North Caucasus. And it should consist of three main elements. Formulating a program of inter-republican and international cooperation. Second, countering Moscow's attempts to foster divisions, which we already see that are almost inevitable. And thirdly, deepening contacts with neighboring countries, as well as with Europe and the US, while explaining the necessity of restoring independence for the North Caucasus. The three tasks are therefore what I would define as planning, defending, and developing. So let's start with planning. Again, no one knows how many new states will emerge from post-Russia and what exact political structures each will develop. However, one administrative format that may have wide appeal is the establishment of pan-regional and pan-republican confederal states that will have a larger population and encompass a broader territory. In this case, of course, between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. As you know, the original independent mountaineer republic that existed just after World War I included 7 constituent states: Dagestan, Chechnya, Ingushetia, Ossetia, Abkhazia, Abkhazia, and the Nogay Steppes. It is also worth remembering that during the Soviet collapse, attempts were made to revive the mountaineer republic and separate from the Russian Federation. And in fact, in November 1991, representatives from 14 nations of the North Caucasus signed a treaty formally founding a confederation based on multi-ethnic solidarity and opposition to Russian imperialism and colonialism. Now, a modern version of the Mountaineer Republic, or Confederation, could thereby also include, must also include, I'd say, the republics of Karachevo-Cherkessia, Kabardino-Balkaria, and Adygea, together with parts of Stavropol and Krasnodar Krais, and also potentially include the Cossack nation. The foundations and principles of such a state must be deliberated now, because a power vacuum could emerge in the region much, much faster than we are currently anticipating, as the central government in Moscow weakens or is disrupted through escalating power struggles and potential mutinies and coups. And among the priorities for debate on the liberation agenda, for instance, are the role of the current Moscow-appointed governors in the transition to independence, the holding of national elections and referenda on questions of statehood, drafting of republican and confederal constitutions, the involvement of the large North Caucasian diaspora in the development of their home countries, the administrative structure of the emerging confederation, and the powers and prerogatives of each republic or entity within the confederation. So there's a lot of work to be done. But such a planning process can itself, I would say, engender cooperation across national, ethnic, linguistic, regional, and religious lines, both in exile and on the ground in the North Caucasus. In particular, young activists must be involved in this process, and I've already met some of them in various capitals as these, as you know, the Forum of Post-Russia has developed over the past year or so. It is also important to work with representatives, and Paul pointed this out, representatives of other nations seeking liberation from Russia, especially the Middle Volga republics, or the proposed Ural Federation, as well as the South Siberian and Far Eastern republics and regions. Experiences can be shared, strategies can be developed for mutual strategies for state construction, international connections, and so on and so forth. Again, a large agenda of work to be accomplished there. So that's my first point. My second point is what I define as defending. As Imperial Russia dissolves, Moscow will inevitably try to intensify its policy of divide and conquer, or divide and disrupt, by pitting nations against each other, including the North Caucasus. We have already witnessed such a policy evolve between Ingushetia and North Ossetia, between Ingushetia and Chechnya, and of course between Chechnya and Dagestan, whereby Moscow exacerbates local grievances and political ambitions of certain political leaders to prevent the emergence of any united front against Muscovite imperialism. Hence, I would say, the framers of a new state or confederation need to address all significant historical, territorial, and resource disputes to preempt Moscow's destructive strategy. And representatives of all nations, including Ossetians, Cossacks, Balkars, and Karachay, must be included in the process. A developing independent federation must not exclude any nation and must address their own aspirations in a spirit of dialogue and compromise. In some cases, existing disputes may actually provide opportunities to involve neutral outside mediators, whether individual countries or multinational organizations, including the OSCE, the United Nations, the European Union. This in itself, I think, will help foster the development of diplomatic relations and international recognitions for the states emerging in the North Caucasus. And my third point, I call developing, looking a little bit more forward, I would say, even more forward. I think each emerging state will confront the enormous task of reconstruction and economic stabilization, and will need significant international diplomatic and material support. Now, international assistance is more likely to be forthcoming for fledgling states that are able to ensure a relatively stable and predictable domestic political, social, and legal environment, or those that possess resources and industries that can attract foreign investment. This will also necessitate a stable regional climate and a broader market than simply that of one small republic. And I agree with this question of too many maps, too many divisions. Let's not confuse Western policymakers too much at this point. And it is worth noting that the North Caucasus republics have a joint population of some 8 million people. That's a rough calculation I made. And that is excluding the bordering krais. Now, such a confederal enterprise, actually this is more citizens than 13 European Union member states and 29 European states altogether, including those that are currently outside the European Union. So such a confederal enterprise can become a regional success, but the planning process will need to focus on such advantages as demographic growth, a large young population, geographic location, as well as the different economic potentials of the new state, of the new confederation. And the key here is not only to communicate what the new confederation is rejecting and what it is emerging from, i.e. Muscovite imperialism, but also to outline the advantages of independence, both for itself and for the broader Caucasian and European regions. A message of potential success must accompany the message of impending liberation. Representatives, I'll add one more thing, representatives from the region should also pursue contacts with neighboring countries, especially Georgia and Azerbaijan. as they will be directly affected by developments in the North Caucasus. And there are, of course, deep historic connections between the two regions. This can also help to develop and implement a formula to settle the future of Abkhazia and South Ossetia once Russian imperial influence is eliminated, because this will directly impact on all emerging states and all existing states. So let me end on there. Let me express my transatlantic support at the moment. I'm in Washington for your work and all that you're trying to accomplish. And thank you again for inviting me to speak. I look forward to future sessions as free nations begin to realize their aspirations. Thank you again.
Thank you, Janusz. Janusz, I have a question. 2 months ago, we together was a conference at DC at the Hudson Institute, and we discussed about collapse of Russia, if you remember. 2 months have passed. For a war in Europe, this is a long time. In 2 months, have the chance for the collapse of Russia change or remain the same? What do you think?
Nothing remains the same. I think the process of what I call rupture is accelerating. We see this both on, or we're going to see increasingly on the front lines in Ukraine, Russian military collapse. I'm convinced the Ukrainian army at least will drive Russian forces out of Donbass and Zaporizhia and Kherson. Crimea may be left till later. But that in itself, I think, will indicate the fragility of the Russian state. Remember, the military is an expression of the country, is an expression of the state. It will also rebound on Russia itself. We're already hearing from various political and military actors about potential mutinies, coups, conflicts between the defense ministry and private armies. Russia itself is being penetrated through various means by forces, whether Russian or otherwise, that would like the country to rupture. So I think the process is accelerating, and of course the Russian propaganda machine hides a lot of what's going on inside the country. I wish our journalists would be a little bit braver, and say our Western journalists would travel deeper into Russia and try to find out the mood in the regions and the republics, and deal with the younger people, what they're thinking about this war and about the increasing economic distress in Russia itself. So yeah, to answer your question, I think the process is actually accelerating.
Thank you, Janusz. Have a question? Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Bugajski, for your presentation. My name is Igor Lasovsky. I'm from the State Service of Ukraine for Ethnic Affairs. From the history, we remember from the Tsarist time and especially from the Soviet Union, the federal government of Russia and Russian Empire, when they painted the borders between the republics of the Caucasus republics in Central Asia, they just painted it in the way whatever they wanted. So they just installed the possibilities for the future border conflicts. What do you think? Are there any perspectives and dangers of the future border conflicts in the Caucasus after the dissolution of the Russian Empire? Thank you.
Yes, it's a good question. Yes, I would say certainly there are potential for conflict. Some of it is engendered indigenously and historically. Some of it will be fostered by the collapsing Russian state, trying to distract attention from its own failure, from its own dissolution. And this is precisely why I think such a format of cooperation as the Mountaineer Republic or the Ural Confederation is very important for people, for nations, representatives to air their grievances, sometimes disputes, I would say, over territory or resources or history or identity in some questions. and to try and resolve these so they're not exploited to prevent these republics and regions from achieving independence. And it's a process. As I said, it's not easy. In some places I do envisage a potential for conflict. I'm sure that Moscow, one of the things that it could well do is, as we witnessed in Yugoslavia during the collapse of Yugoslavia in the 1990s, where the central government tries to whip up Ruski ethno-nationalism. In the case of Yugoslavia, it was Serbian ethno-nationalism, land claims to neighboring republics. I think this could be a potential danger that the Russian state, or the collapsing Russian state, would try and engineer. And again, something that needs to be prepared for, particularly in the regions of republics, do not alienate the Russian population, bring them into the fold, bring them into the new state, give them a stake in the future of these countries and the future of the region, and explain to them that independence will mean greater economic opportunities, international cooperation, and no more dying in foreign wars for the sake of Moscow's expansionist ambitions.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Janusz.
Thank you.